The following is an Ice on Mars presentation.
Far from here, there's a church. Inside the church, there's a box. Inside the box is Judas's hand. Nat is slight and striking as a birch branch. Who cut it off? Ruth asks. How? But Nat's a preacher in a fever. His lesson continues with a new topic. Baby deer have no scent when they are born. Nat conducts the air. Keep those babies safe as long as their stinking mothers stay far away. This is how Nat loves Ruth. He fills her head with his wisdom. So begins Mr. Splitfoot by Samantha Hunt. This episode on
dread.dialectic. Dread.dialectic.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 6. And yeah, Mr. Splitfoot by Samantha Hunt. This is Michael T. Bradley.
This is Scix Maddix.
And we're going to begin, as usual, with a plot synopsis. But before that, just want to lay out, as always, if you have feedbacks, comments, questions, or a novella or novel of your own that you would like us to review, the email address to get in touch with us is dread.dialectic@gmail.com. I can't promise that our reviews will be positive of anything that you give us, but we're going to try very hard to look at anything that's sent our way. And speaking of which, let's go into a plot synopsis of Mr. Splitfoot here. Scix, you wanna give us that?
This is actually giving me flashbacks to school where I'm asked to do a book report for a book that I haven't finished, and that's the case here. It's a two-layer story like it. You've got the adults section and the kids section, right? And the adults are the kids grown up, some of them, or the child thereof. So in the kids part, we've got two kids who grew up in a cult, I guess. They're a boy and a girl, but the girl refers to the boy as her sister. You could argue it's not really a cult. It's sort of a religious orphanage.
Foster home, not...
Yeah. That sounds right. So these two kids are, very, very closely bonded. The boy apparently can talk to the dead. They meet this guy, Mr. Bell, who is a con artist, and he hears the boy's shtick and says, "Look, I will doll you two up and take you into town, and we'll make money conning the rubes." And the kids say, "But it's real," and he says, "I don't care." So that goes on, and that gets kind of increasingly seedy, including a moment where the man and the girl get married so she can get out of the foster home and not get married off to this stranger who's really creepy and eventually loses his nose later in the story for some reason. Adult side, we are first-personing with the daughter of the sister who aged out.
Just so we can keep everything straight, yes. The two kids are Ruth and Nat.
Yes.
Then Mr. Bell, and this character, the daughter, the niece of Ruth, is Cora.
Now, Cora's grown, visiting her mother. Out of the blue, Ruth comes into her bedroom in the middle of the night, and she's got, we didn't mention before, but she's got this scar on her face from when her mother splashed her with acid. Mm-hmm. A frightening visage, and she hasn't been seen in 15 years or so. She can't speak, or doesn't speak, but somehow manages to lure Cora away on this adventure across country, first in a car and then walking.
We're going to do our usual sections here, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good will talk about what we liked, the bad will talk about what we didn't like, and the ugly is for the monster at the end of the book. As this is a horror podcast, most of the stuff has, a werewolf or what have you, and that's where we'll discuss that, and that's the area for spoilers, so not going to get into anything about the ending, which I'll be spoiling for Scix as we talk here. First, before that, trigger warnings.
Child abuse, I guess. Clearly.
Sure. That seems to be a given for everything we've talked about so far.
Implied pedophilic stuff. I don't know if it actually happens in story, but they're essentially selling a child to a man. So, that's trafficking.
All right, so let's go ahead and start in with the good. Scix, what did you find good about this book?
Really conflicted, because part of me really enjoyed it and part of me really hated it. And I have yet to divine what's going on with my brain about this book. I like the setting and the setup of the children's home. I mean, it's disturbing, but it felt kind of real because it wasn't cartoon bad. You know, the people were
Sure.
more stupid and greedy and less evil. You know, I think a lot of authors would have added, would have made it worse because the kids weren't actually being beaten, they weren't being raped, no one was killing dogs. I think a lot of writers would have gone overboard with that, and I think it has a nice, believable feel. I find Ruth interesting. She's like 3 different characters just in the reading that I got to. I mean, she goes through these transformations that we don't necessarily see the transformation, but catching her in each era, she's always interesting to me.
I liked 2 things. One, I liked Mr. Bell. I thought he was an interesting character. He's a con man, and unashamedly so. He's a sort of character who you rarely see. The only other example that I can think of, and this character you kind of meant to hate, but not Mr. Bell, but the character I'm going to bring up, Dick Tremaine from Twin Peaks. That kind of effeminate, but very, very straight, and also kind of a cad.
I think effete rather than effeminate.
There we go. Those are different words.
Yes.
I think that's a character that you see very rarely. Like, all the time, the kids are like, was that a joke? I don't get it. And he just has this kind of snappy patter and everything, but he obviously has affections toward Ruth. Despite the age difference and everything, it's obvious that it's more than just a con or whatever, so...
And I agree, the sort of camp trickster character you don't see much of, at least not in American stuff. And it's an interesting kind of character. I think every story benefits from a trickster. Well, maybe not every, but I think it's a good character. It's a good device to carry the story along.
He definitely does that.
Tricksters, by design, they mess with your expectations. They mess with the people in the story because they're so in it for themselves. You don't really get attached to them enough. So they don't fully pull focus away from the main storyline, usually, unless they are the main storyline.
The other thing that I have that I think is good is I really enjoyed this quote. This is from page 285 of the hardback. This is Nat speaking. Humans are so good at imagining things, they invent gods who feel so real, they then betray us by not existing. I don't really understand that quote, but I thought it was something, I thought it was a good turn of phrase, and it was something worth kind of ruminating on for a while, for sure.
It kind of stands out as something Nat says, because through most of the book, he doesn't talk much. He's through most of the book, pretty empty character. Honestly, he could be replaced by a teddy bear with a recording that says, they wish they could be with you. Ooh.
It wouldn't have surprised me if that were the twist at the end of the book, that, like, Nat wasn't real all along or whatever.
Yeah, let's write that book.
Because that's another thing. Before we move into the bad, this isn't really good or bad. This is just for your edification and mine. Woo. Up until the very end, I was like, is this a supernatural novel at all? It's certainly not horror in the general sense. So I hope there's something supernatural, or else we're reading this book and it really shouldn't have been a horror book. And there is a supernatural element that's thrown in at the very end, but it's like, I honestly thought maybe this was just going to be us reading like the Thornbirds, and the person who recommended it to me was completely batshit. But no, there is a paranormal element. The other thing is the title refers to when the kids do their thing and they contact other people. Mr. Splitfoot is the kind of the medium through which Nat speaks to the dead.
Well, technically, Nat's the medium. He's the medium's guide, is kind of how that's usually referred to.
But once they're doing it for real, i.e. for Mr. Bell, they do away with the Mr. Splitfoot part because they feel it seems kind of childish.
Right.
Let's talk about the bad, Scix. What do you say?
Maybe it's because I haven't finished it, and maybe most of my brain settling happens after it's done. But from opening pages, I was annoyed by this book. And I still am not entirely sure why. I mean, the opening scene, I think, is kind of precious and not in a good way. they're like talking children's bullshit at each other, and it just gets in the way of knowing who they are.
Samantha Hunt is a really, really good writer with absolutely nothing to say. This book is as empty and vacuous as passing wind in a vacuum. This book means nothing, goes nowhere. I literally skimmed 60-70% of it once I realized that the Cora and Ruth walking sections just weren't going to matter.
What?
Didn't add up to anything.
No.
Doesn't matter. None of it means anything. I mean, there's one section that actually ties into the bigger, to what's actually going on, but the rest of it, just completely meaningless.
Oh, it's like she wrote the novel and it was too short, so someone said, tack a road movie on.
The Cora Ruth sections could be a framing device. I mean, that's where our climax takes place, is in the present, which makes sense, right? I mean, not really our climax, our reveal. That's where our reveal takes place, is in the present, but there's no reason for most of it. And I'll get it once we get into the ugly, I'll get into why there's even less reason than just no reason plot-wise. This book kept making me think of another book that I read within the past year or two called Pretty Is by Maggie Mitchell. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Not a horror novel by any stretch of the imagination, but the chapters don't alternate between present and past, but they alternate between two narrators. And it's these two women who were abducted as girls by this guy, and he kind of took them on a road trip. So it has many of the same themes. Pretty Is, however, was just brilliant, and I was just sucked in from everything, and it's really just two women ruminating on how this has changed their life. You see just the little things that are different about them, and the ways that they're the same as most women, and that's kind of horrifying, that this event just is essentially a metaphor for how women are treated in general. This book also included this trope that I'm seeing lately from mostly, I think, female writers, and it's like, yay, I want female writers, I want female voices. But there seems to be this trope developing of, like, woman who has things happen to her, and we try to pass that off as meaningful, and it's like, it's just a boring protagonist. Cora is made pregnant by this man named Lord.
Right.
And she just plays the victim through that, and it's not interesting at all, and it makes me annoyed by her character from the get-go. Like, she spends time at work refreshing a Google search for Lord's wife's name to see if she's died, because she thinks that will improve her relationship with Lord, and it's like, no, it's not going to. Why would you think that?
And in fact, Lord tries to force an abortion on her, which is kind of horrible.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
But it's so breezed over, I mean, it's horrible, and it has potential to color everything that follows, but it really doesn't.
Also, I thought it was so blindingly obvious that he was up to something.
Well, yeah.
And she's just like, oh, yay, maybe he finally came around and he wants to come have dinner with the baby that he doesn't want. And it was like, oh my god, how dumb are you, lady?
And the follow-up actually was more horrifying to me, where he was setting up to give her sexy love-ins, and then he gave her a vaginal suppository of some sort that was supposed to finish the job.
Right.
And I don't think she reacted enough to that.
She's the object of a prepositional phrase. Things are just done to her. It's never once in this story does she initiate any action, I don't believe.
Yeah, I mean, she follows her aunt for no clear reason. It's supposed to be a little bit mysterious, like, why am I doing this? Oh, I don't know. As the road movie goes on, you're supposed to start developing something. And as far as I read, nothing was developed but blisters and pregnancy.
Yeah, I hated that character. So let's go on to the ugly now. At this point, spoilers galore, spoilers beware, and in fact, even more kind of upfront and in-your-face spoilers, because I gotta spoil it for Scix here. So let's see what to talk about first. Because like literally the entire plot of the book takes place in the last like 30 pages or so, and I think you can pull that off. But with this book, it's just shit just happens. Like there's a chapter about going to Walmart, and it's just like
Right.
I mean, and it's like, where the hell is this going? Here's the breakdown. Mr. Bell was part of a cult. That cult is the one thing that we kind of find out from an obese woman who Ruth and Cora talk to at one point in their meanderings. And we find out a few details about the cult, but really, Mr. Bell tells us everything we need to know in a flashback at the end. Mr. Bell was in this cult, and the leader of the cult was named Mardelian, and he was every stereotype of a cult leader ever, right?
He got his start being Mormon adjacent. He was a Joseph Smith lookalike. That was where he got the idea to start a cult.
and so Mr. Bell stole a specific amount of money from Mardelian, and he now has it, and he gives it to the children because they're partners now, and he doesn't really know what to do with it, and so they're gonna like start this life together and everything. They go to the house where the money is stashed. The money is stashed in the house where the cult grew up in. So they go to this house. They are then approached by Mardelian, who has followed them because Mardelian is actually Zeke, the noseless guy who was going to marry Ruth. And the reason that he was going to marry Ruth is because he had found out that Mr. Bell was hanging out with her, and they kind of cleverly, through the book, make it so that Mr. Bell and Zeke don't actually run into each other until that final scene. Then he's like, oh shit, this is Mardelian, he's also my dad, and blah 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 blah.
Also his dad?
Yeah.
Oh, trying too hard.
It's all tied together. We also find out that Nat had gone into town for something that morning, so he's not there when the climax occurs. Zeke, he thinks that they've stolen the money and hidden it somewhere, and through a series of events, he shoots Mr. Bell. Ruth runs to try to save him. They both fall into the ice because they're on the lake. They freeze to death in the ice and die. Ruth was a ghost the entire time for the present day stuff.
Oh.
And
You can't do They Were Dead All Along anymore. That's... pardon the almost pun. There should be a moratorium on They Were Dead All Along for a good long time.
I think John Dies at the End handled it well, since it put such a lampshade on it.
Yes.
So, Ruth's ghost has led Cora this entire way, and she leads her to the house, and at the house now is Nat and most of the foster kids. Nat has taken the foster kids as they age out and as he's grown older, because he thought that Mr. Bell and Ruth ran out on him with the money, because he doesn't know where the money is, and nobody was there when he came back from town, and so he thinks that they ran out on him, and he's basically been destroyed his entire life because of this. Cora finds the money because Ruth's ghost takes her to the place where she hid it, points at it, and then takes her into the house, and Cora lays down. Ruth goes out of the room, and then Nat comes in and is like, what the hell are you doing here? Who are you? And she's like, oh, I'm, Ruth's niece. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember I met you once. What are you doing here? Everything becomes known, and the money is all sodden and moldy and useless now because it's just been sitting there for 15 years out in the wilderness, essentially. Right. But so a lot of questions came up for me. One, all right, so the dead can't talk, I guess, and that's kind of why Ruth never says anything. So it's like, okay, I'll buy that. The dead can point, right? Why couldn't we get in a fucking car? Because we saw that Ruth could get in a car. Get in a car, point to where you want Cora to drive, for God's sake. There's no reason for Cora to have to walk across the fucking state or country or whatever it is to get to where you need to go.
Ruth has some effect on the physical world because she wrapped a blanket around Cora.
Unless that was in Cora's mind, right? I mean, I'm not going to go back through and reread everything, but I don't think she ever has a physical effect on anything except Cora.
Well, I mean, if you accept that Cora's understanding is flawed, then sure, because, I mean, Ruth bought things at Walmart, but I suppose maybe she didn't. Nat can talk to the dead, so I would think that...
That's a con. That's all a lie. None of that was
really?
true.
Because early on he knew kids' parents' names and stuff.
He found the ledger roll or whatever in the guy who ran the place's desk.
Okay.
Ruth and he talk about it. They have a little conversation, which I'm assuming this was inspired by Houdini and his wife, who they went around disproving psychics all the time, and they had a code word between each other so that if one of them died before the other vowed to go around to every psychic they could find and be like, okay, you're talking to my husband/wife, what's the code word? And if they found somebody who knew the code word, then that was proof, because only they knew it.
Right.
I'm pretty sure Harry died first, and his wife, went around and around and around, and nobody knew the code word, obviously, because it's all cold reading and shit like that, And so that's all Nat was doing. He even lied to Ruth about that until the end.
Well, that kind of makes his character slightly shitty.
Yeah.
He seemed like the innocent in the scenario, but he was conning from the start. That's cynical.
So that brings up the bigger question. Instead of leading Cora half across the country and pointing at where the money is to her, why not, say, 10, 12 years earlier, show up to Nat, point to the fucking money then when he could use it?
Right. The money seems like a false MacGuffin there. I guess stories have done that, where there's sort of something people are after, and it turns out to not be good after all. But it was a weak MacGuffin to begin with. I mean, no one was all that fussed about the money.
It's not even really introduced until later. Like, when it's introduced maybe at the halfway point, you just assume that it's been spent, right? Mardelian, when we think that he's Zeke, says that he's looking for Mr. Bell because he took something from him. So it's like, okay, he stole some money in the past, and that's obviously been spent.
Bell isn't driving around in a huge Mercedes, I mean, it was a significant amount of money. I don't know how much, but it would have an effect on one's lifestyle, I would think. It sounded like it was a big enough amount for that.
So yeah, none of it meant a damn thing. It was just a kind of a circular, meaningless thing. Cora doesn't grow up any. Cora doesn't change. Ruth and Mr. Bell are dead.
Cora's mother is probably really upset because her daughter just ran off saying that she went with her missing sister.
She does get in touch with her eventually. Her mom's not super upset. I mean,
of course, nobody really is in this story.
Like I say, I probably skipped at least a good 40% of this book, and I feel like I missed nothing. Because it's just all explained very patly in the last couple of chapters, and I was like, God, this just has no emotional resonance whatsoever. I just don't care. I'm really glad this is done. So, Scix, would you recommend this book to a friend?
I'm trying to think of a context in which it would be. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, same here. Wow, what a waste of time, I think. Again, Samantha Hunt, I think, is really good with words and stringing them together. I just hope that eventually she stumbles onto an idea. If you disagree and want to point out what we're missing, because if you're just like, this book is good, that doesn't help me any, but if you want to point out what we were missing, then I would love to hear back. dread.dialectic@gmail.com. But for now, this is Michael T. Bradley.
And this is Scix Maddix.
And we are